with the recording and turn things over to Omar, and he'll take things from here. So enjoy, Omar.
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone can hear me okay? Thumbs up. Awesome, awesome. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to share a little bit with you in tonight's session. Let me formally introduce myself. My name's Omar Shepard. I have the honor of serving as a curriculum specialist in STEM and career education with the Orange County Department of Education. It really has been an exciting opportunity, but I want to make sure I share this. I, by no means, am no expert in computer science. I happened upon CS as I was serving as the project director for the California Math and Science Grant. There we are. We had $3.5 million and an opportunity to work with multiple districts and schools to help them identify how they can implement the new NGSS standards as well as Common Core standards in math. And along the way, we began to think about what are the ways we can create integrated lessons. We began to learn about project-based learning. We began to learn about what are the different ways we can implement things like algorithmic thinking or computational thinking into some of the lessons that we were planning. And before you knew it, indeed, I had happened upon computer science. It's an interesting because in that time, I've had an opportunity to begin to work with an organization called Q, Computer Using Educators. I'm curious, how many of you have ever heard of Q before? You can drop it in the chat if you've heard of Q. I happen to have the honor of serving as the president of the Orange County affiliate. And then I had a chance to learn about one of my first entrees into the CS space was being introduced to code.org and learning about their platform and also learning a little bit about how students can become deeply engaged when you give them accessible content. From there, as part of our work with the county office, we began to partner to develop what's called a STEM ecosystem. It's this idea that before school, after school, and during school can come together in a way to give students contextualized learning experiences. I really found it to be so interesting to see that when students are able to see what they're learning in school, in their communities, it gives them greater access to seeing the value of that college and career readiness. I know this isn't interesting, but I happen to have the honor of serving as an ambassador for Girls Who Code, really trying to find ways to really remove any barriers that might exist to make sure all students have access to meaningful STEM learning experiences. Before we dive into this, though, let's take a look at what our goals are for today. Our goals for today are to explore the DOLE WHIP lesson planning strategy to engage diverse learners in computer science and review a sample lesson and consider resources for implementation. Now, before we get started, though, I want to take a moment to share with you that a lot of these ideas that I'll be sharing with really came together as a result of a series of experiences that were foundational to my own learning. One of them really began when I had an opportunity to visit High Tech High. Have any of you ever heard of High Tech High before? It's one of the California Department of Education's project-based learning schools here in California. Okay. Yes, it is indeed an amazing place. What I want to share though is when you're beginning to develop a project-based learning mindset, you're beginning to think about, well, gee, what are the things that my students will work on, right? And how will these projects live? Well, when you enter into High Tech High, it really begins to give you a sense of that. And I highly encourage you when you have an opportunity to take a look at this presentation, access it on the CS for All Teachers website. Take a look at some of the student projects that they have listed there. Because as I arrived on campus, from the moment I entered into the space, I knew I was entering into somewhere special. You saw student projects lining the walls. You saw student projects permeating the environment. You saw a reality where students worked on things that became a part of the fabric of the school community. You saw where students had an opportunity to work on projects that really could be engaging and fun. Let's look at this one here. Welcome to Team McCammac's Wakefield's comic book exhibition. Well, we know in project-based learning, the idea is coming up with an essential question. Let's look at what this one says. How can you use physics to create superpowers? Hmm, that sounds pretty interesting there. Me being someone who's a Superman fan, I dove right into that. And I began to think to myself, what kind of things do they have going on here at this school? And as I began to go through the space, I began to see that when students know that their projects are going to live and be represented beyond just what they're doing in the confines of their classroom, or dare I say their Zoom room, how they approach it changes. Here's an interesting project in their Staircase to Nowhere project, where they had these student projects lining the walls. Look at all these representations of student work right in the school space. Admittedly, as I began to develop my own CS mindset, I began to think, gee, look at how all these students are working together. Look at how all these projects have meaningful ways in which the students can connect to them and find intrinsic motivation by. What if we can create lessons that looked just like that? Now, let me pause here for a minute. Dole Whip, yes, it's something delicious, but it really is an acronym. Let me tell you a little bit of story behind it. Now, I shared with you the Q organization, the organization that I often spend time with, computer using educators. Well, after the end of a day, working with John Carripo, the then executive leader with the organization, we were literally eating some Dole Whip. And we began to ask ourselves, isn't this Dole Whip good? We said, yeah, it is. The interesting thing is not only is it good as in it tastes good, but it's also good for you. Wouldn't it be great if lessons in education were just like that? And I began thinking about it. You know, if a lesson was really good for you, it could be engaging for students, right? If it was really fun, it may help them walk away with something that they might be able to remember or apply in different places and spaces. Really, it rested there. It wasn't until a few months later, when in professional learning, I had a chance to think about how can we make sure that when we design lessons, lessons have a high impact to where you can get instant feedback. And that really was the antithesis of the birth of the Dole Whip lesson planning strategy, right? Dole, delivering outstanding learning experiences. Whip, wildly engaging, high impact, instant feedback, pedagogy. Let's think about what that really means, though. I would like for you to take a moment to think back on your own educational journey. What might be some moments that actually stick out? That you actually remember. Maybe an activity you engaged in, maybe a lesson that you participated in. Now, I know we as educators can't make every day in our classroom like Disneyland, right? But might we think of a way of creating entrees to content or creating opportunities and experiences for students that can be delivered in a way that gives them that foundational learning experience, that hook that'll keep them being able to grapple and engage that content. Let's take a look at what that really means, right? When we begin to think about this, we're beginning to think about this through the lens of a project-based learning mindset. Really, we're thinking about what's the project C? What do we want our students to create, build, or do? Is it create a website? Is it build a robot? Is it do something to help build community at the school? Who is the authentic audience? Often, when we think about ways to create inclusive lessons, often when we think about ways of building community, right? Whom are we serving through this project? Who are we authentically meeting, right? What will the students learn? Will your products live? I want to pause here for a minute because later in our session, we will talk about some ideas around integrating UDL strategies into your lesson planning. Now, if you're unfamiliar with UDL, I highly encourage you to look into it. The Universal Design for Learning is a foundational tool to help you ensure that you're planning lessons to meet the needs of all learners. Here's 4 prompts you might ask yourself when you're considering this frame. What do we expect our students to learn? How will we know they are learning? How will we respond when they don't learn? And how will we respond if they already know? Putting on that UDL mindset. If we're planning that at the outset as what I can call in UDL terms a tier 1 planning level, right? This will support us in making sure that we're meeting the needs of all the learners that we're seeking to serve. Here's the big one here. One of the things that was so significant for me on those high tech high slides is this prompt here. Where will your products live? If students know what they're creating, what they're making, what they're doing, it's going to live beyond just this, quick submission, right? It will change how they approach it. What's the project purpose? Why do these lessons matter? Why will your students care? Now, one of the things that's interesting is we haven't really spent much time yet looking at the computer science standards. Admittedly, I almost said California K-12 computer science standards. However, they're based on a national framework. So even though I was going to say that, I can say K-12 computer science standards, right? We acknowledge that the impact of computing is one of the most under considered elements of all of these developments in technology. What are the ways in which we can see our ways we can have through points to this? What will be our entry point? Now, I've been saying a lot here. I want to give anyone to an opportunity to pop in any questions or any thoughts they might have before we continue talking about ways we can utilize this lesson planning strategy. I want to check the chat here. Feel free to take yourself off mute if you do have any questions. All right. So this is the interesting point. What will your entry point be? Sometimes you might say, what's my driving question? What's my essential problem that I'm trying to solve? Well, this is where we can talk for a minute and have some real educator-based conversations, right? Is it teacher-driven or is it student-driven? Let me ask you, do you think one is better than the other? Any thoughts on that? You could type it in the chat or you can come off mute. Teacher driven, student driven?
I know we don't have shy folks on this call either. Let's hear from some of you. Or I should say on this webinar. Go ahead, Aisha.
I honestly think that it just depends. Of course, we want to get our classrooms to be more student driven, but at the beginning, until they learn or until we get our, I guess, driving question out there to prompt these answers and things like that, it will be more teacher driven to get it, to, I guess, gradually release it to be student driven.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful. And I concur. If you recall, one of those prompts that we asked in our initial planning was, what do we expect our students to learn? That inherently is a teacher driven prompt as you think about some of your goals that you seek to meet as a result of students engaging in that lesson. Comparatively, though, I can definitely see opportunities where that student driven piece is also of value. I know that we aren't really talking about this right now, but one of the interesting aspects of the student driven piece is to bring in student voice, whether it's the music the students listen to, whether it's shows the students may be streaming, whether it's colloquial phrases the students may be using. Not so much that it drives the work, but to the degree that students might be able to see themselves in that lesson in that space. And it's something that definitely can become a part of the learning. Now, this is an intentional ploy towards integration. So, when engaging in this lesson, how do we see students engaging in STEM practices? When I say STEM practices, I really want to make sure I add, I see a note here in the chat. It depends upon the goals of the site and classroom culture. I definitely concur. Mr. Landsberger, if you'd like to come off chat and share, off mute and share more about that, we're definitely open to hearing more.
Oh, I was just really agreeing with what you were saying, Mr. Shepard, in that the more that the students see themselves within your classroom and the cultural elements that are there, and of course, as a teacher, you can put your own personality in there a little bit too, in the way that you decorate your room and the way that you set things up. But it's also about being responsive to the students that you're teaching. And one of the things I used to do, I'm not in the classroom anymore, but when I was in the classroom, I would say to students, hey, if you've got a poster or something that you want to bring in that we can hang, I would include those things in our room as well. And that just allows students to have more of a sense of ownership of the educational time that they have.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you. Now, as we begin to evaluate opportunities for integration, I want to give this plug right now to this idea that sometimes, if we're wondering, how can I get these students to have meaningful computer science experiences? Sometimes it happens outside of an actual computer science classroom. Maybe the students are engaging in some work with the Arduino in their physics class. Maybe the students are doing some programming of robots in one of their exploring computer science classes. I know that's a CS specific, but the idea is whether you're having a student log into Scratch and be introduced to creating a code or introducing them to the Raspberry Pi, there are a myriad of opportunities to support a student engaging in computer science. So when thinking about that, we know there's loads of practices that often overlap. The mathematical practices, the science and engineering practices. I'm going to just say the T are practices embedded within computer science because that's our space right now, right? But as we begin thinking about that, I want to make sure that we're acknowledging here in the state of California, we speak through the lens of the 5 C's. I've had some folks say, hey, there's only 4 C's. Well, we would like to add character as that 5th C: critical thinking, communication, creativity, collaboration, and character as ways in which we can think about engaging learners. So within the resource document that we have linked on this slide show, we have some text-based resources that you can reference, but a prompt you can ask yourself as you're planning your lesson is, what will students read, right? So when we think about read, it may be what might be some research they're going to have to do to identify how to best come up with a plan for this project. It might be what might be some reviews of code or text that they have to consider as they're working on this project, et cetera, et cetera. What will students write, right? I would like to argue right now, not argue, but kind of suggest this is a true chance for content integration and collaboration. One of the things here in the state of California are the California Partnership Academies, where you have schools where there are biology teachers, math teachers, science teachers, language arts teachers coming together to acknowledge that we're going to create a pathway here at this school. And there's going to be through points to the things that you are working on, to the degree that when the students have to write, quote unquote, they're going to be writing this paper in my language arts classroom as an example, right? That's just one example. But what will the students write, right? Where are there opportunities for differentiation? Now, this is where I try to make a small plug when thinking about UDL, because one of the interesting aspects of the universal design for learning strategies is not that you won't need to differentiate, but if you can plan true breadth of access in that tier one, that level one of planning your lesson, you create access for all students in your classroom and give them greater access to the content. And I think that's really interesting and critical to share. Now, I want to give you a moment to consider this because these are 3 slides that really have a lot of text on them. There's no way we're going to go through all 3 of these in great depth. But let me just pause to orient your thinking. When we think about universal design for learning, it is a lot to learn. It is. However, when we consider the universal design for learning guidelines in computer science, right? Computational thinking, there are 3 levels by which we consider access, building, and internalize. Sorry, my apologies. I went too far forward. Um, right? So there's multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of access and expression. So when you think about these ideas of creating multiple through points for multiple students, take a moment to review the options within that space, whether it's recruiting interests, right? In the very beginning, giving students choices, allowing students to make projects relevant to culture and age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Provide options for perception, the opportunity to provide access to video tutorials or modeling or multiple means of action and expression. I think this is an opportunity here really to think deeply in the planning phase about ways in which you can embed a little of this in your lesson to give most of the students access to the content. Notice I said most, because we still will need to scaffold, we still will need to differentiate. But if we can think of, I don't know, maybe 80% of those students there that we're going to be reaching, it might give us a way to have it baked in from the very beginning. Now, this is just the access slide. This is build. I'll pause here, give it a gander. And then internalize, right? Multiple means of engagement, options for self-regulation, options for comprehension, options for executive functions. It's quite complex. One would argue you can't include it all, right? But you can be strategic. And that's what we're going to look at right now as we prepare to take a look at how this can be manifest in an actual lesson plan. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. Before we take a look at the DOLE WHIP lesson planning strategy, might there be any questions? Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So this here actually is a link that you'll be able to click on, a sample template of the DOLE WHIP CS lesson planning strategy. Essentially, you'll find the prompts that were offered on the slide deck are what are grounded in this here. So in this sample lesson, we're teaching Python. I'm totally give you an example of a entry-level Python programming course, right? So here we would say, what do you want your students to create, build, or do? List ideas of final products, right? Variable assignment and programming, reassignment of variables, updating variables within a program. What will your students learn or discover? They will learn that the equal sign when writing a program is merely a reference for an object and not an absolute. This will be interesting for students, especially those that have that mathematical grounding. No, you may have a little professional educational argument in the classroom, but that's fun though, right? That's learning. Okay, here we go. Who is the authentic audience? In this case, fellow students in the classroom, peers upon share out, right? Let's take a look here. So making sure I'm checking the chat. I thought I saw a prompt. My apologies here. That's right. That's right. And then looking at this here, my apologies. Students will submit their lessons into the learning management system. That's where it will live. They'll create a narrated video. And then here goes purpose and engagement. What will your entry point be? I would open the class with an image of a problem that seemed to have an obvious answer, and then give the students some time to figure out what the result of the programming scenario would be. What is printed when the following statements execute, right? Now we're going to look at this, computational thinking practices. Select one concept and at least one sub-concept from the graphic below. Now this is where we acknowledge the computer science standards. We're planning our CS lesson. Now, I do know we aren't going deep into the standards right now. So I'm taking a little bit of liberty to think that some of us may have some generalized awareness about the standards. I say that to say we know that there's concepts, sub-concepts, and core practices. We won't be able to embed them all within a lesson, but we can strategically select a concept and a sub-concept and a core practice to focus on to help us plan a lesson, to help us begin to implement the standards for the students that will be engaging. How do you see your students engaging in these computational thinking practices? I know on the graphic it said STEM practices, but here we're going to say computational thinking practices. And here is an example of what's delineated. They'll be introduced to the content, given the opportunity to program where they'll assign a value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you see an opportunity to integrate into content cross-curricular? Well, this is a chance to integrate into Common Core State Standards of Math. And I think we indicate what actual standard here below, right? The CCSS standard and the related standard. Now, you may be saying to yourself, this is going to take a lot of time to develop. Well, inherently, as you begin, it can seem rather time consuming, but I want you to know there's loads of resources available to you. Within the computer science standards, right there within the appendix, right there within the standards, they give you possible through points of connection. It gives you a launching pad for you to consider. Okay, what will students read? This is from an actual text, the runestone text, where students would have a chance to evaluate and learn. Here's some opportunity for differentiation, on-screen text reader, pseudocode development, and the option to submit programs in multiple forms. Remember, on that document, we talked about multiple representation. There's a myriad of options. We clearly can't select them all, right? We're just one teacher, one person doing our best, but we can do our best to select those that would be the most accessible to our students, okay? All right, English learner, collaborative partner work, sample programs, and top 10 cheat sheet on common syntax errors to be on the lookout for. And these are some reflective prompts not to actually do. So you may be saying, what's this all about DOLE WHIP? DOLE WHIP actually is a lesson planning tool. So what are we saying here? How do we make a lesson wildly engaging? That means to do a game, a poll, a share out, etc., right? Here we'll do a chat and a share out. The H, what is the high impact? Well, you're going to be looking at the elemental content focus, right? Teaches concepts around variable assignment and reassigning values within a program. That's that specific lesson elemental focus, right? Instant feedback. In other words, what is your formative assessment strategy? Respond to prompt in chat or poll, real quick and easy here. It's going to help me understand if I can spend more time over this or move on, right? And then pedagogy. Is it didactic, discussion, in person, online? And this is an interesting here because it gives us a chance to think about the multiple ways in which this lesson, right, can be translated into something to really meet the needs of the students in our classroom. All right. So before I give you a glimpse of how that comes together in a lesson, might there be any questions before we proceed? Oh, you're welcome for the acronym, Fannie Lee. All right. All right. Well, hey, let's go ahead and proceed. So this is a sample, right? Just pretend this is slide one. What is a variable? So in this part here, we are really just opening up a prompt. We're asking the students to give us their thoughts. What is a variable? Feel free to type it in the chat, take yourself off mute, tell me what you think, right? We're giving multiple ways for the students to communicate what their thoughts on a variable is, right? From there, we would share with them after we talk with them about it, of course. I know I went back in the slide deck and we have a little bit of dialogue in the space about what a variable is. If I'm honest with you guys, sometimes a strategy I might use is I'll literally hit escape on my screen. I'll come over to Google, I'll type in variable and I'll see what Google defines it as, right? It's a not consistent or having a fixed pattern liable to change, able to be changed or adapted. That's interesting, right? Then I come back to the presentation. So what do we know about a variable? What is a variable, right? Then we'd go into the actual slide. A variable is a name that refers to a value. And we'd spend some time hovering here. And then we'd illustrate what that really means as it relates to when we think of it through the lens of programming. As one of the most, I'd read that narrative there. We'd pause, hover over this. And then I would give them an opportunity, kind of like we talked about in the lesson plan, right? We're going to be giving them opportunities to get a sense of how it works and to give us their predictions on how they would respond, right? And then we would continue the lesson, give them a reassignment reference, give them a chance to really see how it could work, right? And then give them a few opportunities to have some additional chances to figure it out for themselves, right? Give them a prompt, ask them how it would execute, and then send them off into programming land, right? In this two-part assignment. Part one, Draft a program in Python where you assign a value to a variable and subsequently reassign the variable value within the same program. And part two, draft a video or slide deck presentation with screenshots and bullet points describing what's happening computationally and what changes as the program is manipulated. So essentially what we're doing here is thinking of ways we can create lessons that are grounded in content standards, create lessons that can be engaging for our students, create lessons that have embedded assessments, whether it's as simple as a chat or a poll that we can really get instant feedback from that can help to guide our work. So has this given you a hankering for some Dole Whip? Well, you can access the DOLE WHIP CS lesson planning template on the slide by simply clicking there. It'll take you to a blank version of the slide deck. But there are some questions you want to make sure you keep in mind. How would you assess your students had met the standard you were working on? How would you assess if your students had met the content standard you were working on? CS standard, content standard. Therefore, if this is an integrated lesson, right, there's two levels of those standards we're kind of thinking about. And then what would you expect to witness if this practice were active in a classroom, right? These are questions to keep in mind. Now, I do understand earlier in our presentation, I asked you to think back on your educational journey. What are those lessons that stick out? What are those things you actually remember? I know every day can't be a Disneyland day, but we can be strategic in planning meaningfully engaging lessons that can impact students and give them an opportunity to really engage within the learning space. So, with that being shared, what questions might you have? Yes, a link can be posted for the slide deck in the chat. Melissa, would you be able to grab the link and drop it in the chat if you wouldn't mind? Okay,
Sure thing. Just a moment.
thank you. All right. Wonderful. Well, hey, listen, I'm all about sharing resources. And you'll also find this presentation has a link to pretty much everything that we've been sharing, from the actual presentation to a link to the lesson planning template, to links to our CS lesson resources. You'll even find a link to Mr. Landsberger's what is it, cavalcade of CS resources document. And it is really an exciting opportunity to share and to be in this space and to work with the CS for All teacher community to promote CS for All learners. Thank you, Melissa.
No problem. Omar, I'm impressed. You got through those slides fast. You warned me that you could. I was really worried about that.
Oh, no.
Tell me a little bit about, kind of how if teachers weren't sure how to get started and really trying to kind of rethink the way that they're working with their students and be much more inquiry based, like what would be an advice that you would give to someone that was trying to figure out how to make that transition?
Well, I think one of the most difficult things for me in the very beginning was when I sat there at the PBL Leadership Academy and we began our lesson planning through the lens of what would our driving question be? What would our entry point be? Rather than what is the standard that we're looking to teach. As we began to identify what our entry point would be, what our driving essential question would be, the standards came after we began seeking to answer that question, if that made sense.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed.
Very helpful. Other questions from the group?
All right, all right. Well, hey, listen, it's all about sharing resources and My apologies. Someone came to my door. Please forgive me. My son's answering it right now. My sincere apologies. So, again, just a email away. Feel free to uh, reach out to me, oshepard@ocde.us. Also on Twitter, if you're on Twitter, that's at Dr. STEM, DOCTORSTEM. And I'm looking forward to continuing to share up these resources and to make more opportunities for learning available. And please know, DOLE WHIP, really, it's just like we said, all of our lessons should be fun. They should be not fun, but good for our students, and also be beneficial to their learning as well. So thank you so much.
I have a
Thank you.
question.
Sure.
I'm sorry. This is very good for me. My school, we're just starting a computer science. So we are, we've brought in a science teacher, math teacher, and all that. Would it be okay if I share this with them? Because we are focusing on project-based learning at the moment, to be able to, have those interdisciplinary projects and things like that we're working on. But would it be okay if I share these resources with the other teachers at my school?
Absolutely. Please do. Please do. And if they have any questions, like to have any dialogue, please do. Just give me an email or drop a line. I'd be more than happy to support in any way that I can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, indeed.
Awesome. Absolutely. We always want you to share. And once we get that recording posted, I put the link there back to the event on the CS for All Teachers site. That's where we'll put a link to all these things as well as the recording. Give us a day or two to get that up there, but you're always welcome to share that with others. If you could click forward for me, Omar,
Oh,
there's
absolutely.
a couple of slides at the end. That we have. We do have an upcoming webinar that's coming in February, so we've got a little bit of time, but just under a month away. We're going to have a webinar. The webinar will be virtually, of course, but they'll be talking about how to use microbits in the classroom, whether you're virtual or in person. And so look for that on the event calendar soon. The registration link will be there momentarily, and we hope that you will join us at that session or share it with others who might be interested. Microbits are very affordable, kind of a good starting place for students to start out with learning some programming. And then I think there's one more slide before we close out, and that is just encouraging you, if you're not already a member of CS for All Teachers, to please sign up. Aisha, feel free to pass this along to your colleagues as well, to encourage them to be there and get access to the great information and be able to take a look at the calendar and all of that. So we thank you for being with us tonight. We're not gonna keep you here any longer than need be. This has been great, Omar. We appreciate your sharing, and again, look for those resources coming soon. So thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Bye now.